Lovely. You're doing the timings today, aren't you, Damon?
Yeah.
Wonderful.
The meeting's now live, Chair.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's virtual Planning Committee meeting. Before we start, I would like to confirm which committee members are here and the officers who will be supporting us today.
Thank you, Chair. In the meeting room with us today, we have Councillor William Armitage, Councillor Jane Barry, Councillor Andrew Cooper, Councillor Mark Foster, Councillor Carol Huckabee, Councillor Mo Potts, Councillor Alan Powell, Councillor Tracy Reeder, Councillor Jackie Ridgway, Councillor Kathy Rouse, Councillor Diana Ruff, yourself, the chair of this meeting, and Councillor Ross Shipman. Also in attendance is Councillor Heather Liggett, who is speaking today on the second application. The officers that are in the meeting room are Adrian Kirkham, who's the planning manager, Richard Purcell, who's the head of planning, Jenny Owen, who's a solicitor to the council, myself, Nicola Calver, I'm the governance manager, and I'll be facilitating this meeting. We have Alan Marr, who is the clerk and who will be, and also members of the governance team who are supporting today. And we have case officers for the planning applications that will be heard. We have Alice Lockett and Graham Cooper. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. As you're aware, this is only the second time that the council has held a planning committee using the conference call software. We have a protocol in place for meeting in this way, which I would like the meeting facilitator to read.
Thank you, Chair. So this is just reminding all members to keep their cameras on throughout the meeting, to behave as you would in the council chamber, following our rules of procedure, the virtual meeting standing orders as amended at the last meeting of council, to speak through the chair for the meeting, to indicate you wish to speak by raising your hand or writing speak in the chat function, to introduce yourselves at all times, for example, saying Councillor X representing X ward, and just be mindful of your home surroundings. Voting will be done by roll call today, so this will be exactly how we would normally do for a recorded vote in the chamber, while I will call your names in alphabetical order, and if you could indicate clearly for, against or abstain. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. The first item on today's agenda is apologies for absence. Have we received any in advance?
Yes, Chair, we've received apologies from Councillor Peter Elliott.
Thank you. No other apologies?
None received, Chair.
Thank you. Any declarations of interest?
Again, none received, Chair.
Thank you. Members are requested to declare the existence of any nature of disposable pecuniary interest with others not already on their register. If any item on the agenda, please withdraw from the meeting at the appropriate time. And as Alan said, we haven't received any. So we can move on to item 4. This moves us on to our main business today. Item 3, consideration of the planning application. As you can see, each of the individual applications has its own report and is set out in the items 3A, 3B and 3C. I am happy with this and I intend to use it as our running order. However, before we consider the first of these, I would like the clerk to explain how the individual applications will be dealt with.
Right, thank you, Chair. This is the procedure for considering applications at the meeting. We will consider the applications in the order that they are set out on the agenda, although there will be a short break between them. The Chair will introduce the application, then ask the planning officers to refer members to any late comments or updates received since the agenda was issued. The late items agenda supplement has been published on the Council's website, and the link has been sent to committee members. The planning officers will then give a brief presentation, setting out the application plans and photographs from the sites. The screen showing this presentation will be shared with those attending the meeting. You can also see it on the Council's website through its YouTube channel. Following on from this, the Chair will ask each of the speakers, any ward members first, followed by objectors, then the applicant or their agent, to speak to the committee. Each speaker will have 3 minutes to put forward their views using the conferencing facility. There will be a reminder given by the clerk when 30 seconds remain. At the end of the speaker's 3 minutes, members of the committee will have an opportunity to ask the speaker questions, if necessary, to clarify any points they have made. When we have heard from all speakers on an application, the chair will open up the meeting for debate and for determination by vote. A note for speakers: once the application you've come to speak on has been dealt with, you may leave the virtual meeting room. If you choose to remain, however, then please mute your microphone and turn off your camera. You will not be allowed to participate further in the meeting from that point. Now, as you're aware, this meeting is being live streamed. The council will make a recording for the purpose of preparing the minutes. Once the minutes have been approved by the committee, then this recording will be deleted. Please note, however, that others may also record the live stream from the intranet or the internet. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. We'll move on to the first item, but before we start, I'd just like to read out that in line with our normal practice, I'm going to ask the planning officers to tell us about any late comments, reports that have been produced, and for the planning manager to give a brief presentation showing any photos and plans of the site. The meeting facilitator will share the presentation on screen. This means that I might find it difficult to see everyone. Therefore, I will allow the officer to complete his presentation and ask members to reserve any points of order or questions about the process until the end. There will be plenty of time for you to ask any questions later. So we'll move on to the first planning application, which is NED/20009521 Hogarth Rise, Dromfield. Thank you.
Morning, Chair. Thank you. Just to advise members, I'll be taking members through the first application. My colleague Alice will take you through the second one, the Carberry Wood application at Kells Station. Then Graham Cooper will take you through the Town End Shirland application. And of course, I'll be able to advise members on questions further to that, Chair. Just in terms of the first application, if Nikki's able to share the presentation in due course, but just brief introduction, Chair, and referring members firstly to the late representation sent out yesterday afternoon, which I'm sure members will have seen. And just in terms of the introduction, Chair, the applicant in this instance seeks consent to construct a garden room within the curtilage to the rear of his property. The garden room has been partially constructed, Chair, as you'll see from the presentation in a few seconds. It measures 10.5 metres long and 4 metres wide at its greatest extent, and that's width in terms of depth. And the plans, Chair, show the garden room to be 2.5 metres high to eaves with lanterns in the roof to provide additional light to the windows. It would be constructed close to but not on the rear boundary of the property, but extend across the full width of the garden. The plans, Chair, also show a decking area to the rear of the recently extended property, and again we'll see that in a few seconds. The application site, Chair, is bound by other residential units, with those to the rear of the site, those on Holborn Close, Chair, being at a lower level than the application property itself. But again, we'll see those in the photographs in a few seconds. Members will have read, Chair, in the officer report that the development plan policies relevant to the application require such proposals to respect the character and appearance of the surrounding area and not be detrimental to the amenity of neighbours. And officers, Chair, consider that both of those tests are met for the reasons that set out in the officer report. If Nikki's able to share the presentation with you, Chair, I'll just go through that slide by slide. We saw some of these plans and photographs yesterday at the virtual site meeting, Chair, so some members will be familiar with them, but if you just bear with me as I go through them one by one. Just the first slide, Chair, as is customary, will show you the application site. It's outlined in the dark, it's the dark shaded area. If you can just go on to that, Nikki, please. So the application site is the dark shaded area. You can see the properties to the north of the site. They're the ones that are referred to on Holborn Close, and they are set at a lower level to the application site. They're two-storey in nature. The properties either side of the application site are single-storey. And again, we'll see those in a second. Thank you, Nikki. This is a small scale shot of what you'll see a larger scale version of shortly. The application site outlined in red, the white rectangle. Yeah, that's thank you, Nikki. The white box to the top end of the application site, that's the garden room, the subject of the application. The application property is the outlined black and white area to the front of the site and into the middle of the site. And then the dark brown area is the decking area that we'll see in a second. You can see the application room details in the bottom right of that slide, showing a pair of sliding doors and a window that are the windows referred to in the officer report that will face the applicant's own property. There are no other windows proposed, and you can just make out the roof lanterns, but otherwise there's a flat roof to the property to the building. As say, the height to eaves is 2.5 meters. Thanks, Nikki. This is taken from the west of the application site, looking from the bungalow that we'll see the rear elevation of in a second, but to the left of the slide, just behind where you can see the tree, that's the location of the garden room. You can see to the rear of there the fencing that is fencing to the rear of the properties on Holborn Close, which you can make out to the left. Then on the right hand side, the immediate right is a building within the applicant's neighbour's property. And then beyond that, you can see the applicant's property, and then the further properties beyond that are the neighbours. That's to number 23, so that's beyond the application site. These photographs were taken when the case officer visited the site earlier on this year, and as we'll see in a second, the site has moved forward beyond that with the addition of some fencing. These were taken back in the early part of the year. So that's looking towards the rear of the site. Excuse me. The fencing that you can see is that to the rear of the properties on Holborn Close. And in the immediate front of the slide on the right-hand side, that's the decking area that's being constructed. And then to the rear of the site is where the garden room would be located. Thank you, Nikki. This is looking back from the application site towards the nearest neighbour to the west. The rear outlook from that property, showing the two windows looking towards the application site. Thanks, Nikki. You will have seen from the report, Chair, that there is some dispute regarding where the construction is taking place. You can just see in the bottom right of the right-hand photograph the outline of where the garden room would sit, and the applicant is keen for members to understand that he is satisfied that the construction that's taking place is on his land, and that's evidenced by the photograph on the left, where you can see the wall of the property and then a kickback to the extension and the rear elevation of that, a kickback, and then the fence being built behind the line of the wall of the side of the property. So the applicant is satisfied that the application site is within his ownership or control. And therefore, Chair, further to that, if there is an ongoing dispute, that is a matter between the parties, not a matter for members to consider this morning. Thanks, Nikki. This is just showing the outline on the right-hand side, the boundary wall, and then the fence on top of that. The outline of the garden room you can see just coming out of the ground beyond there with the walling that would form its boundaries. And then beyond that is the fencing. At the meeting yesterday, Chair, there was the site visit meeting. There was some questioning regarding the fencing. I did advise members that any fencing over and above 2 meters in height would require planning consent. Otherwise, it is permitted development. But there is no fencing forming part of the application, and no fencing shown on the submitted plans either. So that would be, again, a matter that would be subject to any further control if planning permission was indeed required for it. Thanks, Nikki. On the left here, you can see the rear of the property, the rear elevation of the property with the double doors that would form entrance into the property, and which were approved previously under extensions granted the development of the site. And there's a small patio area in the front, which is shown on the plans. The garden room is to the right in this photograph. Beyond, you can just see next to the fence the outline of where the wall is coming out of the ground. And the fencing, as I say, we did have questioning at the site visit yesterday, the virtual site visit. They did advise members that anything above 2 metres in height would require planning consent in its own right, and due to the COVID restrictions, that's not something that has been investigated, but could be controlled through other means other than this application, if that was the issue, Chair. And if members are minded to accept the officer recommendation, I do think the best way of dealing with that would be to put on an advisory note saying that any fencing over and above 2 metres in height would require planning consent in its own right. Thanks, Nikki. And just finally, but one, Chair, you can see the outline on the left-hand photograph here, the outline of the garden room, it's at a lower level than where the photograph is taken. That's the finished floor levels of the existing house. Then on the right, Chair, there's a view from that across the rear of the garden, again towards the shed, which is on the neighbouring property outside the application site. And then finally, Nikki, if you would, this is looking back from there, Chair, towards the applicant's property. The patio doors there are ones into the property. As I say, the area in the foreground is the patio that's ancillary to that proposal, and the fencing on the left. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Are there any questions at this stage? No. Oh, Councillor Powell. Councillor Powell, you're on mute still.
Yeah, in reference to the slide which shows the next door shed, could the planning manager give us any indication of what the height of the new building would be in relation to that shed? In other words, is it taller, and roughly by how much?
Chair, regrettably, I've not been able to go onto the site myself due to the COVID restrictions. But a garden shed, Chair, would normally be in the region of 1.8 to 2 metres high. So that would be my estimate of its height, Chair. And as I've just mentioned, the garden room would have a height to eaves and then a flat roof beyond that of 2.5 metres. So I think the garden shed will give an estimate of approximately the garden room being approximately I would say 1.5 to 2 feet, so not 500 millimeters, 50 centimeters higher than the garden shed. But just to make it clear to members, Chair, and to Councillor Powell, unfortunately, I've not been able to go on site myself due to the COVID restrictions, so I've not actually measured the garden shed, but that would be my estimate, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Potts.
Chair, that was exactly the question that I was going to ask. But if I may ask an alternative while I have the floor, is it possible, Adrian, when you talk about the maximum height of the fence being permitted to be 2 metres, is that 2 metres from the base of that wall, or is it 2 metres from the top of the wall upwards?
No, Chair, it's 2 metres from ground level. As I mentioned, Chair, on the drawings, well, just to go back in the history, permission has been granted for extensions to the applicant's property, and that did show patio doors to the rear. So I think it's reasonable to expect some patio area to be formed from there. And as you could see on the photographs, the fencing, in my opinion, is reasonable to ensure no overlooking from there to neighbours. But beyond there, as I've just mentioned to Councillor Powell, I've not been on site myself, so I don't know the height of the projected fencing. But so I don't know how high the post that you saw on the photographs is. But as I said, there's nothing in the application details or on the plan showing fencing. So I think it would be reasonable to expect that to be controlled if otherwise members are supportive of the garden room, to advise the applicant that anything above 2 metres in height would require planning consent.
Thank you. Councillor Armitage, then Councillor Shipman.
Thank you, Chair. It's a question for Adrian, really. What's the percentage increase in the footprint of the actual site?
Yeah, as I've just mentioned, it is only, it's not precise because, as you'll have seen from the drawings, there is a kickback in the width or the depth of the garden room, but at its greatest extent it's 4 metres, and the width of the length of it across the rear boundary is 10.5. So I'm guesstimating it's somewhere around about 40 square metres.
Right, thank you.
It's not precise because, as I say, the garden room is of an L shape with a slight kickback, but it's its greatest depth, it's 4 metres, its greatest length, it's 10.5 metres. So it's going to be around about 40 square metres.
Right, thank you.
Councillor Shipman?
Thank you, Chair. I just wondered if you knew, because on the application, Adrian, it says that the way that they're going to dispose of sewage, it says unknown. Is that because that they're not planning to dispose of any sewage from this garden room, or because they are not aware of how they're going to do it yet? Has that changed since the application was put in?
As Councillor Shipman says, Chair, the details on the application form identify there's no known, no stated method of the disposal of the foul sewage. I've taken it, Councillor Shipman, that there is no intent to have that sort of facility in the garden room. But in terms of how surface and foul water would be dealt with, if foul water was an issue, and clearly surface will be, that would be a matter that would normally, on something of this scale, be dealt with purely and simply through the building regulations, who would need to make sure there is adequate disposal of surface water.
Thank you. I believe we've only got one speaker for this application. It's an objector, Steve Hibbert. Mr. Hibbert, you have 3 minutes.
Okay, yeah. You just want me to start?
If you'd just like to confirm your name and then you start, it'd be 3 minutes.
My name's Steve Hibbert. My objection to this application is in 3 parts. Firstly, the planning policies, design and landscape impact. The building is not a summer house as described in the application. There's no way does it reflect that type of building, but rather additional living or office space. The application states that it's for domestic use, but he has registered his business, Thorpe Solutions, at 21 Hogarth Rise. This leads us to conclude that the property will be used for commercial purposes. Having looked at the planning information, it states that over 50% of the land is to be built upon. Planning permission is required. There will be significantly more than 50% built upon, which must affect the drainage of surface water. As a result of this application, the part of the overall project being separate, you, as planners, can't assess the impact of this overdevelopment. Secondly, the character of the neighbourhood and impact on it. Number 21 is positioned at a pinch point entrance to a cul-de-sac on the inside of a curve. Even with the reduced amount of work being done recently, we've been able to see on a regular basis both private and construction vehicles parked outside, often blocking the only pavement. This means the entrance to cul-de-sac is reduced. The blocked pavement has significant impact on the safety of pedestrians as they have to walk round in the middle of the road. It's used by many people as the end of the cul-de-sac leads to a rural footpath. This is part of the link paths for the Dronfield Round Walk, which is being used more than ever at the current time. Lastly, regarding the attitude and honesty of the applicant in relation to planning matters. Although it is accepted the building work starting in good faith, the application form submitted states incorrectly work hasn't started. I feel it is also important to advise the committee that although told to stop work, it has continued despite no planning decision having been made. Mr. Thorpe previous planning application was granted on the basis that although parking was to be lost, a large garage was included. However, this has not been, accommodation was built instead, as evidenced in the diagram on slide 5 of this application. The applicant was told by enforcement that
30 seconds remain, Chair.
Thank you.
He needed to submit prospective planning permission for this change, and and as yet, a year later, he has not. To me, this shows the applicants have no regard for the planning process, and any stipulations made are unlikely to be followed. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Rouse, sorry, I didn't realise you wanted to speak first before we go for questions.
Okay, thank you. All it was, the gentleman has actually touched on what my question was. I did mention this yesterday regarding having a condition. Is there a condition we can actually put on that? Because my belief, as it looks, it could be turned into an annex, but a summer house is a summer house. People have their own ideas and opinions of that. And I'm just wondering if there's any conditions that we can place on that to make sure it's not used as an annex.
Yeah, I'm happy to come back to Councillor Rouse on that point, but I don't want to subvert process for any questions that members may have for Mr. Hibbert, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you. Are there any questions for Mr. Hibbert? Councillor Shipman?
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to know if Mr. Hibbert was aware of any additional flooding issues that had occurred since, because obviously development seems to have already started on this site and the floor plan has already been concreted in. I wondered if he'd noticed on any of the adjacent properties or had evidence of the fact that there'd been flooding onto his or any of his neighbours' property.
I've not onto mine. I'm next door but one. I know somebody on Holbein Close has sent an email and raised an objection due to the fact that he is 2 metres below. He's concerned that there might be flooding onto his property. We've not had much rain recently.
Thank you. Any further questions? Thank you, Mr. Hibbert.
Yeah.
Are there any further questions for the planning officers?
I'm happy, Chair, at this point to come back to Councillor Rouse if you'd like me to.
Yes, that's fine. Thank you.
Just in terms of the issue about the business use, which I think is the issue that Councillor Rouse is raising, Chair, the applicant is seeking consent for a building ancillary to the use of the property as a domestic property and not as a business operation. So if there were to be any change in the use of the property to mixed use from just a purely residential use to a mixed use residential and business property, then that would require planning consent. Of course, you may use your house, as we're all doing this morning, for other purposes other than just being a residential property, providing you don't change the character and appearance of the dwelling house. And many people do use a room or rooms within the house to work from home, for example, as a number of us are doing at the moment, and that wouldn't require planning consent. However, yeah, just getting to the point that Councillor Rouse has specifically raised, officers are content that the building would be used in conjunction with the house and so not require a change of use. But just in this case, in view of the comments that have been made, officers are recommending, Chair, just for the sake of clarity and completeness, at condition 3, that the outbuilding shall be used only for ancillary domestic use and not for any business use itself. So whilst technically the condition is not essential, it may in this case, Chair, provide members with the comfort that the local planning authority would retain control over the use of the building as such.
Thank you. Are there any further questions? Councillor Foster?
Yeah, a question for the planning manager. How have you satisfied yourself that this is to be used as a summer house and it's not just an extension to the building and it won't be used for business purposes? Thank you.
Just on that point, Chair, the officers have taken the application on its face, and it's made as an ancillary outbuilding in connection with the house as such, and we've dealt with it as such. And I'd advise planning committee as well that you should deal with it in that frame. Just getting back to what I've said to Councillor Rouse just previously, if there is any change of use of the premises to an activity that's beyond what you would normally expect as a domestic property, then that would be something that would require planning consent in its own right. And I believe, Chair, that could be dealt with through the proper channels if and when that were to take place.
Thank you. If we were to recommend this, I would like one other condition put in, Adrian, and that's regarding the height of the fencing. When you look at those pictures, it does cast quite deep shadows into the neighbouring gardens, just to ensure that they do meet the actual height standard.
Chair, what I'd suggest is if members are minded to grant consent, that we frame a condition, should members wish it, that notwithstanding any submitted details, the height of any fencing shall not exceed 2 metres in height, Chair.
Thank you. Are there any further questions? Okay, I think then this is where we move for a motion. So we've completed all our discussions, what we've heard and what we think and what we would decide. But before going on further, we'd just like the clerk to remind us about the motions. Oh, Councillor Powell's waving at me. Sorry, Councillor Powell. You're still muted, Councillor.
I'm not making a motion at this point, but I'd just like to make a comment. It's described in the application as a summer house or alternatively a garden room. It's not like any summer house I've ever seen. It's a brick building with one window, as far as I can see, with lanterns to the roof. And the other point is, it always concerns me when there is an application which has got some controversy, when the applicant chooses not to come before the committee to be questioned. And I think that's quite significant. So that's a comment I'd like to make, Chair.
Thank you.
If I may just briefly come back on that, as members will have seen yesterday, the applicant has submitted further comments that were included in the late update reports yesterday, Chair, which sought to address some of the issues that have been raised in Mr. Hibbard's comments to members and in the officer report. So the applicant has submitted that, Chair, in seeking to advise members on some of those issues.
Thank you.
Councillor Foster wishes to speak, Chair.
Councillor Foster.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not proposing a motion at this stage, but I feel a lot more comfortable looking at something like this, looking at this application for this brick-built annex, which looks like an outbuilding and not a summer house. I feel much more comfortable giving my opinion on whether we should give planning permission if it was defined as what it seems to be. If it was defined as an outbuilding, we can't say what the applicant's going to use it for. That's done in a matter of trust. But I'd feel much more comfortable if it was defined as what it seems to be in the plans. It looks like a brick-built building. I've seen the plans, looked at the area, and it doesn't look like a summer house. Could I ask from the planning manager if it wasn't put down on the application as a summer house and it was described as an annex and further living area, how would we be treating this? Thank you.
From an office point of view, Chair, we would be dealing with it in the same manner that we've dealt with it as the description as a garden room in terms of how members deal with the application. I wouldn't advise members to get too caught up in what's actually described in the application form. As clearly as Councillor Powell has articulated, the building is as shown on the drawings. Yes, it is a brick building with limited windows to the front elevation and lanterns to the roof. I think members need to consider it on its face and what's shown on the plans, and if it were described as an outbuilding rather than as a garden room or an annex to the house, then planning officers would have reported in the same way, just that the description of the application would have changed, Chair. Members need to consider the application this morning on its face, on the basis of the submitted details, and to retain a consideration of it on the basis of your development plan policies, irrespective of what the application is titled, Chair. So I understand the points that Councillor Powell and Councillor Foster are making in terms of how it's described, but I don't think that should be the determining factor for members and officers retain the view that the building is shown and described as an ancillary building to the main house. And if it were to be used for other purposes, that would require planning consent and would be dealt with in the normal channels, and members would have the chance to consider that then on its face at that time.
Councillor Armitage.
Thank you, Chair. Looking at this summer house, the size of it and also its construction, I don't think it is a summer house at all. The footings are there, and again, without planning permission at the time, but that's nothing to do with my decision on this. It's got a cavity wall, as you would do with a proper construction for living accommodation according to building regulations, and I would move to go against officer's recommendation, because this is no way a summer house. It's also the size of the building, which is too large as well for the actual site. I think it's overdevelopment of site. Thank you, Chair.
Helpful at this point if I gave some advice in terms of the process for motions.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Please bear in mind, members, that a motion must be moved and seconded before a vote is taken. If an amendment to a motion is moved and seconded, then that amendment will be voted on first. If a motion is to be moved which goes against officer recommendations, then the member who has moved the motion must give the reasons for doing so. The reasons for moving a motion against officer recommendations should comprise the relevant planning issues and be supported by evidence as necessary. If a motion to reject officer recommendations fails, or in other words, it is not passed, then that doesn't mean that the recommendations are automatically approved. Rather, you will need to take a positive decision through a further motion in favour of the recommendations or another course of action. This will need to be approved by the committee through another vote. Thank you, Chair.
Before we have a motion, Adrian Kirkham would like to speak.
Yes, if I can come back, if I may, Chair, just specifically again to the points that Councillor Armitage has made, and really need to advise members that you need to consider the planning merits of the application and not necessarily what it's described as or what it's called on the application form or what you feel that the applicant may do with the building subsequent to any permission that's granted. You need to consider the application on its face and on its merits as a building that's proposed in the rear garden of a property. And also you need to avoid considering or being led by the fact that the development has started. That isn't a matter for you to consider. You need to consider the application on its merits. Now, Councillor Armitage has mentioned size of the building and potential overdevelopment, but again, Chair, members need to consider why those points may be harmful, what interest do they harm, because a building of a size may be large, but that doesn't necessarily make it unacceptable. It needs to have some harm or some impact on something of importance, normally a public interest, and not just a private interest. And I have to say, Chair, I've not yet heard any consideration of any harm that the building would cause to neighbouring properties or the character of the area, which are the issues that you need to assess and which are set out in your development plan policies. Councillor Armitage has talked about overdevelopment, but why is that necessarily an issue here? Why is that harmful? What interest does it impact on? So, Chair, just to ask members to take their decision on the planning merits of the application, not be too concerned about how it may be described or what a future use may be. You need to consider it on its merits and on its face. and what harm the building has on any interest of importance. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Shipman, then Councillor Foster, then we really ought to move on.
Thank you, Chair. I'm really struggling with taking this application on its merit, because if you take it on its merit, the applicant's saying that there's been no development taken place so far, and clearly there has been development taken so far. So if we are taking it on its merit, we've got an applicant that's trying to mislead this committee, as far as I can see. In terms of what planning issues this applicant could potentially have, if you allow this, call it summer house, garden house, greenhouse, whatever you want to call it, if we allow this on this property with the size of footing it has, I think that the cumulative effect that if, for example, the neighbouring properties then want to also put their own in on an area that's got an elevation like this, where flooding could go down the hill and flood properties that are lower down, we could easily create an issue for not only those residents at the top of the hill, but those at the bottom, because you could end up with 16 summer houses along the back end of their property, and all those that are lower down could end up with severe flooding issues. So for me, if we're going to reject it, which I'm leaning towards at this moment in time, it's got to be on the cumulative impact of having a garden, a summer house of that size.
Thank you. Councillor Foster?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Further to what Councillor Shipman and Councillor Armitage said, and from the advice we've had from the planning manager, for me, it's I'd consider this overdevelopment or overcrowding of the site. I've made a few notes here, in particular where this is, it's out of character with the area. When you look at the rest of the house, it's completely out of character. So I'd consider it overdevelopment, and that there's a negative visual impact here when it's considered, when you look at all the gardens and all the buildings and take them as a whole. So for me, a detrimental effect on the character of the local area. Would there be sufficient grounds in the planning manager's view?
Thank you. Adrian?
Chair, I'm just going back on Councillor Foster's issues, Chair. I'm mindful that you're wanting to move along. Councillor Foster's mentioned out of character with the area, overdevelopment having a negative impact. Unfortunately, Councillor Foster, part of what you said, you went silent on me, so I missed a little bit of the last couple of sentences. If you could just outline those back to me. But just to be clear, Chair, Councillor Foster's point in terms of out of character with the area, overdevelopment and negative impact. I think Councillor Foster may be going on to say why overdevelopment was leading to that negative impact. I think that will be important in framing any reason for a few that members are minded to go in that direction. Just before Councillor Foster comes back, Chair, if I may, just on the point that Councillor Shipman made about other development and potentially other garden rooms, what may happen outside the auspices of this application, Chair, are not matters for members to consider this morning. There may be other applications for garden rooms. They would be considered on their merits at that time. And the only other point to just mention, Councillor Shipman mentioned about surface water, Chair. As always, I'd advise members to steer clear of technical matters unless you've very clear and sound evidence that there is a technical issue that would be disturbed by granting consent in this case. And I've not heard this morning any evidence why or how surface water disposal would be harmful, Chair, or why adequate provision couldn't be made for it. But if Councillor Foster can just fill me in on the couple of sentences I'm afraid I didn't hear. I apologise, Chair.
Yes, Chair, would you like me to carry on?
Yes, please do.
Yeah. For me, it's the visual impact on the whole area, on the locality, that this would have a detrimental effect on the character of the whole area. What it looks as it is now, it does look like an overdevelopment to me.
Thank you. Councillor Shipman, then Councillor Barry and Councillor Potts, and then we really must move for a motion. We're way over time here.
Thank you, Chair. I have to disagree with Adrian on this, because actually under the NPPF 49A, it says the development that's proposed is so substantial, or its cumulative effect will be so significant that to grant permission would undermine the planning making process by predetermining decisions about the scale, location and phasing of new development that are central to an emerging plan. Well, if we were to pass this, we would literally be predetermining future developments, because if any neighbours wanted to have a garden room, we would basically be giving them, we'd have to approve theirs if we're approving this one. So I would have to disagree with Adrian that we can't take into account other future applications, because we can. The NPPF says that explicitly.
Thank you. Adrian, do you want to come back on that?
Chair, I can't add anything to what I've said previously. I know what Councillor Shipman has said about the NPPF, but ultimately each application must be judged on its merits, and future applications need to be judged on their own merits. And in terms of the issues that Councillor Shipman's made, I believe they're more pertinent to the plan making process rather than to applications such as this, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Barry?
Yeah, Adrian, am I right in saying that we do have enforcement officers that we can send out to do spot checks to see that something is being used for what it was meant to be used for, so that if in a few months' time or 12 months' time we feel we want to go and do a spot check, that we can send an enforcement officer out?
Yes, Chair. If there is a breach of planning control, we do have enforcement officers who could go and check upon any concerns that's raised with us, Chair, or ultimately if yourself or the Vice Chair wished for us to go out and make a visit in, say, 12 months' time, we could diary that in, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Potts?
Thank you, Chair. My question is to the planning manager. Had the applicants included this proposal in the application that was approved in 2019, would your recommendation have been the same, or would you have considered at that point that this would have been in excess of the permitted building to be allowed?
That's a difficult question to answer, Councillor Potts, because ultimately 2019 was 2019 and now it's 2020. But I think my view would be, reacting to that question, that yes, we would have sought to recommend approval for the whole scheme if it had all been submitted as one. The applicant in this case, as he set out in his representation, was of the view that what he was constructing was permitted development, and if he hadn't constructed the other extensions, it would have been, it meets all those other tests. But because of the other extensions, this proposal itself requires permission, because more than 50% of his garden curtilage, rather than just his garden, is to be constructed with buildings over it. Hope that answers Councillor Potts' question, Chair.
Thank you. And if I'm going to ask the clerk now to take us through the correct procedure for a motion.
Yes, Chair. So far, we've got, just further to what I've just said before, we've got a mover for a motion to go against officer recommendations. Sorry, do you want him to speak there, Adrian?
Very briefly, Chair, I've noted what Councillor Foster's specific issues were. I was just going to say, Alan, before we move to the vote, if there is a resolution to refuse the application, that the final reasonings for refusal are based on Councillor Foster's comments, but that's finalised in conjunction with the Chair and Vice Chair.
Councillor Foster?
I'm happy to second Councillor Armitage's motion, and if, much like the planning manager said, if we do base it around sound reasons, sound solid reasons, which what I've spoken about, just to go over it again, for me it's the size of the property, it's size of the building on the area, it's overdevelopment, it's out of character in that area, and it's got a negative, an adverse visual impact on the locality, and a whole detrimental effect to the proposed development on the character of the local area. So if we can base it around that, please.
Thank you. Councillor Armitage?
If Councillor Armitage is happy with that.
Yes, I'm just going to say, yes, I'm happy to go along with Councillor Foster's recommendations.
Thank
On
you.
that basis, Chair, then, I think the motion is to reject officer recommendations for the conditions as discussed, which are essentially around size of the building, overdevelopment, out of character, and detrimental to the wider area. Is that largely capturing?
I
Yes.
believe so. Right, thank you. Okay, we need to take the vote then by poll. I'll take this over to Nikki Carver.
Thank you, Chair. So members, you are voting on a motion to go against officer recommendation. I'm going to take you through a vote by roll call, which would be the same as if we were doing a recorded vote in the chamber, and I'll commence that in alphabetical order. If you could clearly say for, against, or abstain. Councillor William Armitage.
I'm going against officer's recommendation.
So that would be a vote for, would it, Councillor Armitage?
Yes.
For the motion, yes.
Yes.
Councillor Barry.
Against.
Councillor Cooper.
Against.
Councillor Mark Foster.
Or
Councillor Carol Huckabee. Councillor Huckabee, would you mind unmuting yourself to give your vote?
Yes, against.
Mopotts, Councillor Mopotts.
For.
Councillor Alan Powell.
For.
Councillor Tracy Reeder. Councillor Jackie Ridgway.
Against.
Councillor Cathy Rouse.
Against.
Councillor Diana Ruff.
What are you going on with the majority?
Apologies, there's somebody speaking. I could not hear Councillor Ruff's
Against.
vote. And Councillor Ross Shipman.
Or.
Yeah, I make that 5 votes for and 7 against.
Thank you. So the motion has.
The motion has fallen.
Thank you. The clerk would like to take us through the next stage.
Yes, then, Chair, it's a matter of there is yet to be a motion for members to sort of vote on. So given the fact that the officer recommendations have now, or the amendment to the officer recommendations have been rejected, do members wish to make another motion?
I'd like to put forward a motion that we recommend officers accept reference to the officer's recommendations with the conditions supplied that we've talked about previously around the fencing and the point 3, which is already on, which is about the use of the building. I'm not sure, Adrian, if we can condition into there about the enforcement officers' visits.
That wouldn't be a condition, Chair, if members are minded to approve the application. What I'd suggest, Chair, in conjunction with yourself, that we diary the visit in by enforcement officers in 12 months' time.
Thank you. I'll second the motion put forward by Councillor Barry.
So that the motion is then to approve officer recommendations for the conditions as discussed and as set out in the report. Is that the essence of it?
Yes, thank you.
Yes.
Very happy for me to lead a vote.
Yes, please.
Okay, members, I'll take you through the vote again. So we're voting on whether to grant permission in line with officer recommendations. We're asking for, against, or abstain from that motion. Councillor William Armitage.
Against.
Councillor Jane Barry.
For.
Councillor Andrew Cooper.
For.
Councillor Mark Foster.
against.
Councillor Carol Huckabee.
Against.
Councillor Mopotts.
Against.
Councillor Alan Powell.
Against.
Councillor Tracy Reader.
4.
Councillor Jackie Ridgway.
4.
Councillor Kathy Rouse. Councillor Kathy Rouse. Councillor Rouse, you're muted.
4.
Councillor Diana Ruff.
4.
Oh, God.
Councillor Ross Shipman.
Against.
Yeah, I make that 6 against and 6 for. Would you like to exercise Chairman's casting vote?
I will do. It's 4.
Oh,
Therefore, officer recommendations to Damp Commission are carried, Chair.
oh.
Thank you. If we can move on to the next application, which is the Ashover, which is NED/20/00371. And this is the application for a side extension at Cambry Wood, Kelstage Lane. So hand over to the planning officer.
So thank you, Chair. Nikki, have we got the the screen? Thank you. Okay. So for clarity, this application has now been amended to remove the dormer windows and the conversion of the loft and the new garage. So the proposal is now for a single-storey side extension to the western elevation, and the access to the site will remain as existing. Can we move to the next slide, please? Carberry Wood is located on the corner of Kelstage Lane and the A632 Matlock to Chesterfield Road at Kelstage. It's highlighted in orange on here. The property is within the settlement development limits for Kelstage, as the boundary runs along Kelstage Lane, and so the field to the north is in Countryside. The main policies that we're looking at here are H5 domestic extensions, BE1 general design, and GS5 settlement development limits. Can we have the next slide, please? Thank you. This slide shows the location plan. The property to the south, next to the A632, is the neighbour at the cottage. The hedges discussed in the report are along the boundary between the two properties, so that's sort of southern, southwestern boundary. Can we have the next slide, please? This slide shows the plans for the existing bungalow with the garage to the east. It's a bit faint, but you should be able to see the hedge in the bottom left-hand corner on the boundary with the cottage. That's it, yeah, down there. Thank you. Can I have the next slide, please? Where are we? 80. Sorry. The proposed extension will be on the western elevation. If members are minded to approve the application, a condition to retain the hedge in the left-hand corner behind the extension is proposed. We can have the next slide, please. Here we have the plans and elevations for the existing bungalow. And then on the next slide, yeah, these are the plans and elevations for the proposed extension. As you can see, it will result in a new wing to the bungalow, but there'll be no increase in height. The width of the new wing will be about 9.85 metres, and it'll be about 13 metres at the deepest point. Then we move on to photographs. Okay. Here you can see the existing access point and the view to the east towards the A632. Next slide, please. And this is the view going west along Kelstage Lane from the access point. Next slide, please. So the extension is going to be added to the western elevation of the property. The buildings you can see behind there are agricultural buildings. Next slide, please. So again, this is another view of the western elevation of the bungalow where the extension will be located. And then the next slide, this is the front elevation of the current bungalow. And then that's the garage, which will be retained. Okay, so this is another view of the location of the extension. If you note the hedge at the boundary with the cottage down the bottom there. And then there's another one where it's a bit closer, I think. Yeah, it's just a similar view. And then that's the hedge a bit closer up. So you can see it's about 3 meters high and it's quite deep. Next slide, please. So this oh, sorry, can you just go back one? Sorry. Yeah, so this is another view of the site showing the agriculture building to the right and the roof of the croft, which is one of the houses on Vernon Lane at the bottom there. And that's separated from the garden of Carberry Wood and its own garden by the garden of the cottage. Oh, and then last two are just views from further away up the A632 if you're coming from Chesterfield. I think that's all. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I've lost my place now. Okay. Are there any questions at this stage?
Yes.
Councillor Armitage?
Yeah, could we go back to the first slide when it says about the actual title of the application still says about dormer windows and things like that. All right, it may have been amended, but the title is still with the dormer windows. Yeah, is it a technicality or what really?
Just come in on that to that, Chair. First of all, my apologies to members for that. But yes, as Councillor Armitage has said, it is purely and simply a technicality. Officers have negotiated a subsequent scheme with the applicant, Chair, and members are just being asked to consider the extension, and no part of the roof, as Alice has explained, or different garaging out, whatever, no longer forms part of the application, Chair. So the report is accurate in terms of the detailing set out there. It sought to assess the application as now considered, and the title in the committee report is correct. So I apologise, Chair, that the title on the presentation is of the original application and doesn't reflect what has been negotiated subsequently.
Thank you.
But that, if I just come in, that's the application which we always said, the application which is on the table, and you know, that's the one that we're deciding on, surely, because it's incorrect, as people would like to say. I don't know where we stand on this.
Chair, just so I can be absolutely clear, Chair, in that respect, Councillor Armitage is incorrect, that the application before you is that it has been negotiated by officers. I apologise again that the title on the presentation was taken from the originally submitted forms, but the matter before members is purely and simply the extension, as Alice has outlined to you just now, and you've no need to consider anything that formed part of the basis of the applications originally submitted. So the matter before you is clear, Chair. You're able to make a clear decision on that, on its planning merits, and you need only consider the extension. And in terms of the report that's before you, that is correct and full and gives you all the information that you need to have and to consider to determine the application.
Okay, I accept your apology on that. Okay.
Okay, we have, I believe, What? Alan, did you want to speak? Sorry, Councillor Powell?
No.
No, okay, thank you. I believe we have one speaker, an objector, Linda Kamkar. I can't see, where is he? Oh, yeah.
Chair, Councillor Ross Shipman has indicated he wishes to speak.
Okay, let's go with Councillor Shipman and then we'll move on to Linda.
Thank you, Chair. I just wondered if one of the planning officers could explain to me why, or if they're aware why DCC originally said that they wanted the entrance move in, but seem to have changed their mind now, and said that they've got no objection, because originally DCC did actually object to quite a few things, and the report that's been given to members don't really highlight that was their original objections to it. And I find it a bit strange that this seem to, just because the garage has been removed, the visibility coming out of that property seems to have improved. I'm a bit lost on that fact. And I'm also, it concerns me that DCC have also said that they've guessed that the traffic will be around 15 miles per hour, even though they've carried out no traffic survey. Well, if they're not looking at the road, how can they determine exactly how fast people are pulling off A632?
Excuse me, Chair. I mean, they're fairly big issues. Would it be better to answer them after Mrs. Kamkar's had the opportunity to speak?
I'm happy with that. If Councillor Shipman's happy with that.
Yeah, no problem, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Mrs. Kamkar, if you'd like to speak, you have 3 minutes from when you're ready.
Thank you. My name is Linda Kamkar and I live at the cottage, Ashover Road, which neighbours the Carberry Wood site. The proposed development is to extend the property by almost a third of the original site. The extension would provide a 5-bedroom bungalow, which would include a vast master bedroom, ensuite and dressing room, which is approximately 13 metres in length. I consider this would make the whole building out of character with other properties in the neighbourhood, and as a result will have a detrimental impact on the landscape due to the overdevelopment of the site and the loss of garden space. It would not be unrealistic to assume that the proposed development consisting of 5 bedrooms would house a minimum of 5 people. Therefore, one would expect there to be numerous cars at this site. Due to the driveway being in close proximity with the very busy A632 and next to a blind corner, it would prove hazardous and dangerous to other road users and pedestrians, as there is no footpath when cars are exiting and entering the site. There is also a hedge bordering Carberry Wood and my property, and it runs the entire length of the site. There has been no mention of what the intentions are regarding the main centre hedge and the upper portion of the hedge in the planning application. And the photograph that has been submitted only shows the lower hedge. Numerous birds and wildlife live in that hedge, and it is quite deep. These sections of the hedge, should these sections of the hedge be removed, it would have a detrimental impact to the wildlife and inhabitants of these hedgerows, and the windows of Carberry Wood would look directly into my garden and into another neighbour's property. The upper section of the hedge, which also borders my property, marked as a fence on the plans, although it has been a hedge for at least 15 years and probably well over 20, is situated to the side of my first floor decking area. Should there be any removal of this part of the hedge and the trees, then not only would wildlife again be affected, but my upper decking would be unusable due to the lack of privacy, as anyone on my decking would not only be visible to the inhabitants of Carberry Wood, but also to anyone using Kelstage Lane and anyone driving down Matlock Road and passing through Kelstage. It would have a detrimental impact on my privacy should any of these hedges be removed. Thank you.
Thank you. Shall we ask Mrs. Cartmore any questions before we go back to Councillor Shipman?
That's fine with me, Chair.
Thank you. Any questions? No.
No members are indicating they wish to ask a question, Chair.
Thank you, Mrs. Kamkar. That's all for now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Back to you, Councillor Shipman.
Yeah, it was just my concerns, about the fact that, I mean, DCC did object to begin with about the access off Kelstage Lane. So I think that that's probably worth mentioning so members are aware. If you look at the original objections, talk about visibility coming onto Kelstage Lane and, you know, pulling on and off of there. They also do actually make, they talk about cars will be travelling at 15 mile an hour down Kelstage Lane, but they admit themselves that they've done no traffic survey, which I find bizarre to even them to make that statement. Because again, it's leading us to believe that cars are travelling at 15 mile an hour when clearly they don't know that for a fact. And I think that it's not quite right that they're telling us that as a planning committee. So I just wondered if the officers had been informed of anything from DCC as to why they've made this massive U-turn on the visibility from the entrance, even though no amendments have been made to that part of the application, and why and if they would give the fact anyway, the fact that DCC are saying traffic are travelling at 15 mile an hour, given the fact that they've not done anything to substantiate that.
Can I respond, Chair, please?
Certainly.
Sorry.
Certainly, carry on.
Oh, thanks, sorry. So the original application had a different access point to the west, further west along the boundary, where there was going to also be a detached garage. And that's what DCC objected to. They were concerned that there wasn't space to turn around and there wasn't good visibility from that access point. The amended plan, uses the existing access point, which DCC are happy is sufficient.
And just add to that, Chair, in terms of the issue that Councillor Shipman raised, and which members are well within their rights to consider the issue of highway safety. As Alice has just explained, the originally submitted application proposed a new access point, so there would have been two accesses, whereas now, through the amendments that have been secured by officers, only one would remain. And the fact that a speed survey hasn't been done, I don't believe, Chair, is overriding in this case for members, because the extension would be used in conjunction with the house. There would remain the single access point, and as many members will probably know, Kelstage Lane, I think by its very nature, will have limited traffic speeds along it, and the access is in close proximity to its junction with the Matlock Chesterfield Road. So vehicles either approaching it or leaving the main road into Kelstage Lane, from my experience and in my opinion, would be travelling at very low speeds and potentially not in excess of 15 miles an hour. I'd be surprised. Happy to discuss further highway issues as appropriate, Chair, but I firmly of the belief, Chair, that this proposal will not have a severe impact on highway safety in this location and on the basis of the submitted details.
Thank you. Councillor Armitage.
Thank you, Chair. It was on highway safety. If you remember, on a previous application, which was the appeal was dismissed, and the inspector did mention that they had concerns about the entrance and the visibility displays, bearing in mind that the entrance which is on the plan now is only a few yards from the main road. And something else which has come to my notice is that nothing's been mentioned about a turning area whereby the cars concerned have to go out nose first rather than going out backwards, because if they go out backwards, it will certainly be an accident waiting to happen. And there's no nothing on the plan to give turning area. You can probably do a 3-point or a 23-point turn on the actual thing, but there should be a designated turning area so that people can turn the vehicle round and exit forward, because that road is very narrow and there isn't a turning. Well, if you go down that road, you have to go for about a mile before you can turn round even. It was just an observation.
Yeah, I don't know if Nikki's able to bring back the presentation and allow us to have a look at a site plan if members wish to discuss that issue that Councillor Armitage has raised in terms of turning, Chair. But you'll have seen from one of the photographs that there is quite a significant area of hard standing in front of the garage. It's just a few slides onto the photographs first, if you can, Nikki. Just keep going to the one. There's one of the garage, that one there, that shows a vehicle already on the site and a large area of hard standing. So I would agree with Councillor Armitage that vehicles would be able to turn within the site and come out in a forward gear, Chair. So I'd be concerned if members were so concerned about that matter that was relied on significantly in determining the application. Just finally, Chair, in terms of the appeal decision that Councillor Armitage refers to, that was in relation to a new dwelling house, which would have created its own issues and considerations rather than the extension to an existing. So I don't think the two are comparable in any case, although, Chair, I'm not familiar, as perhaps Councillor Armitage is, with the exact wording of the appeal decision. But again, this is an application for an extension, so I don't believe that the appeal decision that Councillor Armitage is referring to is directly pertinent to how you consider an application for an extension to the property.
If I could come back to
I'd
you.
like to say something first, William, before, if I may.
Sorry about that.
We have had a site visit on this, which was for the previous application, and this is an exceptionally large plot, so there would be more than ample room to even add to a turning circle there, plus the drive that is already there for people to come in and out easily. There's been no mention in here about the hedge being removed. In fact, it's a condition that the hedge stays. And where the extension is actually going to be placed, it wouldn't have much of an impact on Mrs. Campar at all. I would suggest one of the conditions I would like to see in there is maybe that where that hedge is thinner, it could be thickened up. But this is covered in the extension, in the conditions rather. So this is one plot that is rather large, and really it's a shame people couldn't go and actually view it, because I think you'd get a far better reasoning and understanding of how it's sited. William?
Yes, thank you, Chair. It was really, you know, if we could have made, we're going to have obviously another bedroom, so there could be another couple of cars or another car, and parking space on this plan is a bit small for actually turning and coming out in a forward gear. And I think there should be an area in front of the well, to the left, where they felled all those trees of the garage on the site, which could be made so that there was more parking space, bearing in mind that there are going to be obviously more inhabitants of the property, and also the fact that the new extension stays as an integral part of the building and has to remain that way and not to be sold off as another residence.
Chair, if I may, some of the points that you've made very, very briefly, if members are concerned about the need for some beefing up of the hedgerow. Condition 3 could be amended, Chair, to require submission of those details, agreement, and then implementation. If members are concerned about the issue that Councillor Armitage has raised regarding provision of a turning area, that too could be conditioned, Chair. And also, finally, the issue about the extension, if permitted, remaining ancillary to the house. Again, as we've just discussed in terms of the Dronfield application, Chair, and a condition could be attached for belt and braces to require that. Although for any use of this property as 2 dwellings, that would be something that would require permission in its own right. So I think all those issues, Chair, could be addressed by condition if members are otherwise satisfied, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Foster?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. If Councillor Armitage is happy with those 3 conditions being added, the turning circle, the fact that it can't be separated. Sorry, I missed the other one. If Councillor Armitage is happy with those 3, I'd be happy to support a motion to grant permission with those 3 considerations.
I'm quite happy to second that. Thank you. Then we can move on. And I've seen that.
Could I?
If Councillor Armitage is happy, I said.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, could the hedge be? Because I know at one point it had just about disappeared. If it could be conditioned that where it's got the on the plan, there's a yellow part which said it's to be looked at, it's to be conditioned. Could it be extended to go across the whole distance?
Yeah, if otherwise members are happy and that's the only issue that's outstanding, then you could do that. But as an officer, my advice has to be that you should be considering this application and not seeking to address other issues by condition on the application before you. That's for the extension. So the proviso is that if you are satisfied otherwise and you do want hedging all along that boundary with the property that backs onto the cottage, that's Mrs. Kamkar's property, you could impose a condition on that. But in my mind, that would go beyond reasonableness in this case, because the area that I think Councillor Armitage is concerning about is some considerable distance from where the extension is. But I'm in your hands, Chair.
Thank you.
I think one of the things which came up from Mrs. Kamkar was the fact about her privacy. Well, if that hedge is if the conditions put on to the existing hedge as it is at the moment, then I can't see a problem with the privacy factor. Bearing in mind that there were a number of substantial trees on that site which have been felled already. There's nothing, you know, if you're not going to protect the hedge could end up being felled. And also you've got the wildlife aspect as well. So,
yeah, I'm just keen not to misunderstand members in taking your vote in a few seconds' time, Chair. As Councillor Foster's just outlined, the issues regarding ancillary nature of the extension and turning area, I'm clear on those, but I would need to be clear, Chair, if you're minded to grant consent, whether you would want a landscaping scheme that incorporated additional hedging across the entire boundary, or just as set out on the plan as Annex 1 to the report, which outlines an area in red that officers believe is directly associated with the extension. But again, Chair, I'm in your hands. Just need to clarity from you and members, Chair, if you minded to grant permission in respect of those conditions, and specifically the one regarding the hedge stroke landscaping.
Adrian, could we just see the picture of the hedge again, so councillor members are clear about the hedge?
If Nick is able to assist us, Chair, yes.
Apologies, one moment.
We're very much reliant on Nikki, Chair. I'm very grateful to her for orchestrating the presentation, because the technicalities of the screen sharing are a bit beyond my IT's ability. So very grateful to Nikki for doing all this, Chair. If you can keep going, Nikki, please. Just get to, there's just one below there. That's a good one. As you can see, Chair, that's the area of hedgerow that I believe you're referring to, where there are some bits and pieces of gaps and you would want the hedging retained, although as officers set out, I think the application, the extension would be acceptable even without the retention of the hedge. But notwithstanding that, Chair, officers have responded to the comments made and looking to retain that hedgerow. If you can just go back a few, Nikki, I don't know, just the one with the garage on, that one there, please. Just behind there, Chair, I think is the area that Councillor Armitage is referring to. It's some distance away from the hedge, the extension, so isn't directly in an officer opinion related to it. However, Chair, as I keep on saying, I don't want to unnecessarily prolong discussion and debate on the application, and we're in members' hands. If members are asking for the planting of some boundary hedging or trees along there, then I just need clarity on that, Chair, and framing any conditions should you be minded to grant permission for the extension.
Could we just go to slide 29, Nikki, if that's available? Thank you. So the extension is actually going here, at this, where the virtually where the pile of rocks are.
That's right, yes, Chair.
So that's the opposite end of Mrs. Camcar's property, isn't it?
Yeah, Mrs. Camcar's property isn't that one that you can see the roof of there. No. Yeah, that's, as Alice has explained, that's beyond
that
Mrs.
picture
Camcar's
there.
garden.
Sorry, that's a better one. So the full hedging right at the far side is a full thick hedge, which isn't being taken out, etc. So she's still got her privacy now. So her privacy wouldn't be interrupted by an extension at this end of the building.
That's certainly officer opinion, Chair, and that's retained in greater level by the retention of the hedgerow. Although, as I say, officers would take the view that even without the hedgerow, the impact on the property next door that Mrs. Camcar resides on wouldn't be impacted on, because the property itself is some considerable distance away from this point. That area beyond the hedge there is the garden to that property, and some distance away from it, as members will see on the location plan in their papers.
Thank you. Thank you.
As I say, Chair, I'm not wishing to unnecessarily prolong discussion on this, just need to be clear what members are minded should you be minded to grant permission.
Okay, Councillor Barry?
Yes, all I was going to say, really, when you look at that picture of number 29, it looks like you can see slightly through the hedging. So I take it what William's after is for some infill planting to take place at that particular area. There's a small wooden fencing that I think what William would want is some trees planting, some hedging planting at that particular area, which would mean that they couldn't see through. As it is at the minute, you could perhaps see through there if you went right up to the hedge to see next door. So is that what you're saying, William? And that area is what you want to be filled in?
Well, the thing is, that hedge, there is that gap, which is as much as you can see, but then the hedge then continues all the way along. And before, substantial trees were felled and one thing and another, and there would be no protection to stop the hedge being felled. And I think we should respect the privacy of the neighbour and retain the whole of that hedge and not just the one in yellow, because you can't actually see unless you've actually been on the site and looked behind. You will see, I think it's just in on the actual plan, it does show after the yellow, it does show that there is a hedge, and I would like that to be retained.
It's okay. Right, thank you. So we can move on then. Are there any further questions? No? Are we ready for a motion?
Just the one point, Chair, just on the hedging, I'm taking that the vote you're taking is based on, would be based on the officer recommendation, Chair, but with the conditions regarding ancillary nature of the extension, the provision of a turning area, and the landscaping of the site along the entire southern boundary, Chair, and not just the area outlined in red in your papers. That's the way that I'm reading the debate and the discussion.
Yes, thank you.
On that basis, Chair, that you have a motion which has been moved and seconded to approve officer recommendations on the basis of those discussions, which sort of conditions which Adrian's just specified.
Yeah, that's fine. So we go, oh, is everyone happy? We're going to go to the vote. Thank you, Nikki. So, sorry, Councillor Foster.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Can we make sure we've got those conditions correct? And before it's that the planning manager is in touch with Councillor Armitage to make sure we've got exactly what we need on those on that hedging. Could I ask for that?
That's fine.
I'd suggest, Chair, that if Councillor Foster's happy with this, that the motion, if members are minded to grant permission, it's subject to those conditions delegated to myself in consultation with yourself, Chair, Councillor Barry as Vice Chair, and Councillor Armitage, Chair.
Okay.
Thank you. Off we go then, Nikki.
Thank you. I'll read members' names in alphabetical order. If you could indicate clearly for, against, or abstain. Councillor William Armitage.
For.
Councillor Jane Barry.
For.
Councillor Andrew Cooper.
For.
Councillor Mark Foster. Councillor Carol Huckabee. Bear with me one moment. Would you unmute Councillor Huckabee? For, against, or abstain, Councillor Huckabee?
For.
Councillor Mo Potts.
For.
Councillor Alan Powell.
For.
Councillor Tracy Reader.
For.
Councillor Jackie Ridgway.
For.
Councillor Kathy Rouse.
For.
Councillor Diana Ruff.
For.
And Councillor Ross Shipman.
For.
That's 12 votes for, Chair. That's carried.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. I've seen some flashing messages for a short break. If I say we're back here for what? I don't think they'd have time to get there then. 10 minutes? Is everyone happy with that? So back at 10 to, is it 10 to 12? Thank you.
Chair, the feed is now live.
Thank you. We'll start the final application for this morning, and that is for NED/20/00285/FL. And this is the change of use for a menage to commercial sale of vehicles affecting setting of a listed building. Over to the planning officer.
Thanks, Chair. Nikki, if we could have the first slide of the presentation up, please. While that's happening, Chair, we've in receipt of late representations, which are included in the late report to members. Hopefully you've had a chance to have a quick look through those. For clarity, this application is for the change of use of a riding arena to the commercial sale of vehicles, in this instance, camper vans. The site sits to the south of a listed building and in open countryside, closely related to the settlement of Shirland. Access is taken along a track which will be modified to allow easier access and passing within the site. The main planning considerations for you are for this application are the suitability of the proposal in this location in policy terms, its effect on the character and appearance of the site and the surrounding street scene, the impact upon the nearby listed building, the impact on the privacy and amenity of neighbouring residents and land users, along with highway safety matters. Officers do not consider that there are any technical reasons to refuse this application, and subject to a number of conditions outlined in the report, officers recommend approval of the proposed development. Now, this slide, this shows the application site shaded in orange on the plan. The site sits in Shirland off Main Road, which connects Alfreton to the south, Claycross to the north. The applicant's property just to the northwest on the corner of Main Road and Town End, that is a listed building, and to the south of that there is an orchard with a number of protected trees. And as you see, open countryside sits to the east of the site, and there are a number of properties just to the south of the access, which you can probably just make out on that plan. So if we can move to the next slide, please. This is the submitted location plan with the site edged in red. Other land under the applicant's ownership is edged in blue. As you can see, that extends to the northwest and to the east of the application site. Next slide, please. This block plan illustrates the area to be used for the proposed storage and sale of vehicles. You can see space within the site is limited, and the access track, which leads from Main Road to the west, sweeps up and around the application site and also leads to the applicant's property. Next slide, please. This is an updated block plan of the site, and it illustrates the location of a laurel hedge marked in green along the northern edge of the access. The proposal is to remove the first 21 metres of the hedge to allow for a wider access and a passing place. The section of hedge between the passing place illustrated on this plan and the building to the east will be retained. Next slide, please. This is an enhanced block plan provided by the applicant and just perhaps shows a little bit more clarity of the existing planting in and around the site and the relationship with the neighbouring property to the southwest. Next slide, please. Now, these are the photos taken from site. This photo is taken from opposite the application site on Main Road. You can see the laurel hedge in question, just to the left of the silver car and before the wall. Now, behind that hedge, there is the wall continues down into the site, and it forms the rear kind of boundary of the orchard. As discussed earlier, a section of about 21 metres of the hedge, which is a laurel hedge, will be removed. Next slide, please. This is taken from the entrance looking south along Main Road. Next slide, please. This is a view taken north. You can just, this is a historic photo taken from Google, just taken to the north. As you see, Town End is kind of behind the bus, which is seen in the photo there. Next slide, please. This photo shows the context of the site entrance and the neighbouring property. A low fence separates the two until it rises to about 1.8 metres and then continues all the way down the access track. Next slide, please. This has been taken from looking within the site, looking back west along the access track. As you can see, the fence probably extends to about 2 metres in height at this point. Next slide, please. This is just taken from a little bit further around the bend. So it starts to bend to the north towards the application property and the application site. As you can see, the fence continues along this boundary. Next slide, please. This photo is taken looking west from the access track into the riding arena. As you can see, the site is surrounded by mature tree planting. Some of these trees are protected. Just to be clear, no trees will be removed as a result of the proposed development. Next slide, please. This is one of a few photos that I've got from within the site. This looks southwest back towards the neighbouring properties. Next slide, please. This is looking south back towards outbuildings that you can probably just make out the roof above one of those tractors. That's just one of the outbuildings at the neighbouring property. Next slide, please. Yeah. This is another angle taken from the northwest corner of the riding arena looking southeast. Next slide, please. This is taken again from in the riding arena, and this is looking back towards the applicant's property, the listed building on Town End. As you can see, views from the riding arena back towards the applicant's property and listed building are, near on impossible from within the site. And the final photo, please. This is just taken from within the site, looking east towards the open countryside. As you can see, the high fence terminates probably just behind the hedging that you can see on the right hand side, and then it opens up with post and rail fencing, and you've got a glimpsing view into the open countryside. And Chair, that just concludes my presentation.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, there we go. Are there any questions at this stage? No, fair enough. I would ask the Principal Clerk now to read out the protocol for the next part of the meeting. You're still on mute, Alan.
I do apologise for that, Chair. Yeah, essentially, Chair, the next stage will be for the Speaker to address the committee. And I believe we only have one speaker on this item, Councillor Liggett, in her capacity as Ward Councillor.
Thank you. Councillor Liggett, if you'd like to address the council, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Diana. Good afternoon, everybody. I asked for this application to be heard by committee for several reasons. One, its position in the centre of a residential area in the middle of the village and in the grounds of one of the only Grade 2 listed properties in the village. It does seem a very strange place to position such a commercial business. But my main reason is probably not legally wrong, but morally wrong to pass an application that uses a shared access. Both Mr. and Mrs. Hind in the neighbouring property that you saw on the pictures and the bungalow next to them, both families use this access road, and both families have lived there for 20 years, and both families are extremely stressed by the application. I'm also concerned about the removing of the 21 metres of hedge. Even if it is not a native hedge, it is still a wildlife habitat. Condition 7.4 states, local plan policy BE9, where appropriate, the retention of trees and other landscaping features. Then, in 7.8, it asks for 21 metres of hedgerow to be removed to widen the access. Also, due to the position of the entrance onto the A61 on a sharp corner and at the brow of a hill, and with such a narrow opening, getting large vehicles, especially load loaders, which is suggested, would be very difficult, damn near impossible, I would say. It just seems a very strange place to run this sort of business from, whilst causing great distress to the residents next door. Even highways in 4.2 have raised concerns relating to the access width. As you saw, it is a single track road. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Are there any questions at this stage? Councillor Shipman?
Thank you, Chair. I just wondered if Councillor Liggett thought, because obviously if this were to be passed, there would need to be access to the site. Would it be more beneficial for the hedgerow to remain and for it to just be single access? Or do you believe, Councillor Liggett, that it might be worth actually those hedgerows coming out and they've been replaced elsewhere? I'm just thinking, for me, I think you'd have to almost move the hedgerows because you'd have to have a passing point to enter that site. Because I'm struggling to find planning reasons as to why you couldn't at the moment. Obviously, we'll learn more as things are going, but I'm struggling to find planning reasons why you could reject this proposal, because it's an unused menagerie, and having access to a particular road doesn't necessarily negate any planning applications that would require the same bit of road. So I'm just thinking, what would a way round some of your concerns be to that we could add as conditions potentially if it was passed?
I don't really think removing the hedge is going to make an awful lot of difference, because that hedge is not that wide. It has been there for at least 20 years, but I really don't think it will make a lot of difference to actually pulling out at the safety of pulling out onto the A61, because it is rather a nasty junction anyway. My main issues are we really going to get what we're being asked here? Because it doesn't quite ring true. I mean, when this application first went in, it was just for van storage. The neighbours were so concerned, they asked me to bring it in. And then it was changed to van sales, which is what they suspected was going to happen all along. Also, the amount of vehicles that the applicant is saying that will be visited doesn't seem to make any sense to me. 1 or 2 a week, 1 or 2 customers. I don't see how you can be running a commercial business like that. It just seems a little bit strange to me,
Right,
which is
okay.
another reason we've brought it forward.
Thank you.
This is to the clerk. Clerk, is this where the letter I gave you this morning is relevant?
1 second, Chair. Just give me a moment, please.
I think it might be for this afternoon. I just wanted to double check.
Yes, sorry, I just want to check that it's for this afternoon.
We'll listen to Mark Foster first. Councillor Foster?
Thank you, Chair. We've got in the paperwork, we've got a statement saying there'll be no more than 5 vehicle deliveries per week, and customer appointments to the site shall be limited to 1 per day. That on the face of it doesn't seem like an awful lot. If we were to grant permission for this application, could that be put in the conditions, something like that, some sort of a, I don't know, restriction? What I'm thinking of is before, when it was used as a menagerie with the horses and what have you, that you'd be having that sort of traffic anyway along this lane. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, are there any further questions?
Councillor Cooper, Chair.
That was a Chair. That was a question to the planning manager. Could we put these?
Right, okay.
Yeah, if I may, the issues I believe that Councillor Foster is raising, Chair, are set out as recommended conditions within the officer recommendation in terms of the deliveries. The number of visitors. That's condition 10, Chair. Deliveries are 9. That's 9. And the appointments only taking place between certain time limits, that's condition 12. And they are all, and Graham will correct me if I'm wrong here, Chair, but they're all taken from the applicant's submission that's been made and I believe could be enforceable. But perhaps to address one of the points that Councillor Liggett made in terms of how the business will operate, as set out in the initial paragraphs of the report, it's paragraph 2.7, Chair. The sales and negotiations, it's designed to take place online and over the phone primarily. So it's a number of businesses that I know of, some within North East Derbyshire, some outside. There's more and more of this activity taking place online. And so it's intended to be operated on that basis, hence the restrictions that the applicant has put forward as to why the limited number of customers and visitors will be necessary to visit the site. But also the point that Councillor Foster's made, Chair, in terms of the previous use, that's also something that you need to be minded of, that there is an ex-ante permission for use of the site as a menage, and certainly vehicles going to and from there will be potentially articulated in nature. So that's also a consideration, Chair.
One thing to just pick up is in the late reps, the applicant has requested just a little bit more flexibility with the appointments. Rather than 1 per day, is requesting 6 per week and no more than 3 in one day. And what we've done is we've amended condition 10 just to make sure that there's no overlap and that there's a gap between appointments. So the scale of operation will still be quite limited. And also about the habitat mitigation, you know, we could look at perhaps some replanting of some habitat or some native hedgerow elsewhere in the site, perhaps.
Thank you. Councillor Shipman?
Yeah, just on what Graham's said, I would like actually that to be the case in terms of the native hedgerow put perhaps around the site to help with blocking the site off from people looking into the site. Because obviously with there being a conservation area quite close by, if we can almost put native hedgerow there to mitigate any that's removed. Personally, I would like to see the hedgerow stay along that lane, because ultimately it's a one-way road anyway. You know, horse boxes and stuff would have been going up there anyway with the hedgerow in place. So to me, it's destroying a habitat for the sake of what I don't see the benefits there to actually warrant the removal of that hedgerow. But if we are doing that, then certainly it needs to be replaced elsewhere on the site. I would probably suggest there's a condition that's put around the site itself to block any view into it.
Thank you. Planning officer want to come back on that?
Certainly, that's fine, Chair. We could add on. Councillor Shipman believes it addresses a point to require a planting landscaping scheme, and having landscaping around that menage may be the most for that, as Graham's pointed out. Getting some native species as opposed to the laurel may be an appropriate way forward. Hopefully, Councillor Shipman would think that addresses his concerns.
Thank you. Councillor Potts?
Thank you, Chair. I've got 2 questions. Do you want me to do them both together or separately?
Just go.
Am I allowed to? The first one is about the actual proposal description, because though within the planning application it does indicate that this is for the sale of camper vans, but the actual proposal description refers to commercial sale of vehicles. And a quick Google of Wright Van Limited does say that they deal in vehicles ranging from vans up to 7.5 ton trucks. I don't know how big a 7.5 ton truck is, but it sounds very big to me. So if we are going to be asked to vote on the general commercial sale of general vehicles, how are we going to ensure that we're not going to have 7.5 ton trucks being driven up that access road? That's the first question. And the second one relates to car parking spaces within the site. It says 20 spaces would be provided, but the plan only illustrates space for 7 cars. If there's only 1 customer at a time coming in, why do we need space for 7 or 20 cars? Or does that include the spaces for the vehicles that are up for sale? Thank you.
Is it Graham?
Yeah, Adrian, I don't know if you want to perhaps chip in on this one as well. So the area of parking, I think that's just purely illustrative on the plan. So what we've done is we've asked for a scheme of parking, customer parking and manoeuvring area to be submitted and approved by the LPA as a condition. That's condition 6. Now that will just clarify which areas will be used for parking, which should be kept clear to stop people parking, you know, the vans, and where will be the area of sales within the site. With regards to the size of the vehicles, the proposal is for vehicle sales. And as you can say, we've tried to limit the use to the operator and owner of the property. And we've restricted it to the storage and sales of vehicles. Now that's what we can do under this proposal. I don't know if, Adrian, you can perhaps guide me a bit further, perhaps about the size of vehicles, maybe limiting that.
I think the point that Councillor Potts makes is valid, Chair, and it's clearly a consideration that the condition 3 would limit the site to be for the storage and sale of vehicles only. So there could be any vehicles, but if Councillor Potts was particularly concerned about that issue, then yes, it could be controlled to allow only for the storage and sale of vehicles to a certain level. And if Councillor Potts has any thoughts or concerns about that, that could be controlled through condition and be enforceable. The point though that Graham's just made, I think they are issues that we've considered. First of all, the area of the application site, that the menage, what would be the former menage, is self-limiting of the number of vehicles that would be able to be placed on the site. It clearly couldn't extend beyond the application site, and as you've seen on the photographs, the site is very well contained, in my view, by large planting and trees, and so there would be an element of self limitation there. And also, as Graham's pointed out, the conditions would require that the site is only operated by owners of the property itself to town end. So you wouldn't have other workers or other people operating on the site coming to the site. So again, there's a self limitation there. So if members are concerned about the size of the vehicles visiting the site, then that could be controlled by condition. But as I say, as officers, we've taken into account the existing use, potential for vehicles to go to and from anyway, and then the conditions that Graham's outlined do provide an element of self-regulation and self-regulation of the capacity of vehicles that can come and go from the site.
Thank you. Councillor Potts, is that okay?
Yeah, as I say, I don't have technical knowledge to be able to say limit it to vehicles of a certain weight, but when I look at one of the pictures that you showed in the presentation of the car coming out, it does concern me that if there isn't a restriction put on the size of the vehicles, any enormous truck coming out of there, I mean, because you do have to cross the pavement, and I am concerned about pedestrian safety at that access point.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Foster.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, further to what Councillor Potts has said, I've got two questions. The first one in relation to Councillor Potts. The planning manager replied, conditions could be put on restricting vehicles to a certain level. So to a certain level, that's not weight, yeah, but to a certain level, that was what was defined. In the proposal, it speaks about wanting to buy and sell high-end camper vans, and yet everything in the conditions is relating to vehicle sales. So if the proposal was for vehicle sales, we'd look at this differently, I think. But because the proposal is for high-end camper vans, I believe that the definition should also be high-end camper vans and not just vehicles. So not vehicles relating up to 7.5 ton or any of the weight limits. So excluding commercial vehicles, excluding them, and could we just define it with camper vans in the actual conditions? So high-end camper vans as per the proposal. So could the conditions be relate to the actual proposal? And that's the first one. The second one related to this. When it comes to signage outside at the end of the lane, what I wouldn't want to do is them to have a sign that said vehicle sales on it. Now that would be to stop people just stopping by without appointments, because the original proposal in the conditions are, did we say up to 6 a week? Now what I wouldn't want to do is encourage people stopping by. So if it said J-Blogs, camper van sales, people would drive down there, or they'd park on that road and they'd walk down that lane, or they'd drive down that lane. So is that so there's 2 questions there. The second one is, could it be a condition where we made it clear that you can't put camper van sales or vehicle sales on the outside of that lane, just the name? Thank you.
Planning officer.
Yeah, I presume you can hear me, Chair. I've got the controls right. And Graham, I'm sure will come in if I'm wrong. First of all, on the issue of the size of the vehicles, 7.5. I'm no vehicle expert, but I understand 7.5 tons would be what I would understand to be a Luton size lorry. So not one of the large HGVs, but of a certain size. Just an answer to the comments that Councillor Foster's made, I do believe that a planning condition could defined and written to limit the sales to camper vans only, but it would need to be something along the lines of vehicles designed for, it would need to be precise enough, but vehicles designed for camping to allow for, I'm not sure if living in is the right word, but anyway, holidaying in or living in, I'm sure members understand what I'm trying to say. So a condition could be placed on any permission to that effect, I believe, but it would need to be very tightly written. If that was members' concern, yes, I do believe that could be contained within the condition. And I hope I've got this right, Councillor Foster, and I apologise if I haven't. But I think your concern is about advertisements generally, advertising the business on the roadside. If it is, then that would be controlled through the advertisement regulations requiring permission for signs over and above certain sizes, but there is permitted rights for certain size adverts to be constructed under what is the equivalent for adverts of permitted development, so not needing the consent of the council. So that would be permitted without coming to the council, but over and above that, consent would be required for any signage.
On that, and just to come back on that, Chair, could it be a condition that they don't include campervan sales on the sign? Could that be a condition?
I apologise. I think I did misunderstand then. The content of the signage, no, that couldn't be controlled. The wording or whatever couldn't be controlled on the sign. The content of the signage is not something that's within our powers. The general design, nature, size, etc., would be if it required the consent of the council, but we couldn't specify certain words aren't written or set out on that signage.
Councillor Shipman.
Yeah, if I can just follow on from what Councillor Foster was saying about the limiting it to camper vans, I think that's probably the wrong thing to limit. I think you need to limit the size, because it's the size which is trying to get down the lane. It's not, whether it's a camper van or a lorry, I think we need to limit the size of vehicles so it's not having an adverse effect on the residents that are along that lane. Because we can say, right, only camper vans, but then they bring a 8.5 ton truck down the lane and it's causing havoc. So I think I'm less concerned about what it is they're selling, and I'm more concerned about causing aggro to the residents along that lane. So I would put, whether it's a 7.5 ton limit we put on it or whatever. I mean, looking at the size of 7.5 ton vehicles, they are the smallest type of trucks, if you like. 7.5 ton. They are pretty big trucks though, but they seem to be the smaller end of the different truck sizes. So I'd probably perhaps just put it under 7.5 ton, to be honest with you, at the limit, just so it stops. So it will be camper vans, but they're not be, and there might be some trucks, but they might not necessarily be the massive 7.5 ton trucks. It might just be the box vans.
Nikki, is it worth bringing up the presentation, just show a photo of the track? Because the track is very self-limiting in the kind of size of vehicle that can actually get down there because of the bend that occurs, and they're not proposing to make any changes to the access track. So yeah, that's a good photo. So that perhaps just helps members a little bit, that one and the previous frame. Those two photos might be quite useful in that it's quite kind of self-regulating the access. Hopefully that's helpful to members.
Thank you. Councillor Cooper, been very patient.
Thank you,
And
Chair.
Councillor Reader.
It's along the same lines as many of my colleagues, basically. First and foremost to the officers, is there a limit to how many vehicles can actually be stored on site? That's first question. And secondly, I know it says no more than 5 deliveries per week, but once again, going along the same track as many of my colleagues, the size of delivery, and a delivery may mean to some people 1 vehicle. Is it restricted to 1 vehicle, or could they end up bringing 2 vehicles per delivery, i.e. 5 ends up being 10 as opposed to 5 ends up being 5? And in order to sort of try and help the neighbours who live also with access on that lane, could they not notify the neighbours of when those deliveries are going to take place and the days that they're going to take place?
Thank you. Back to the planning officers.
Again, I'll ask Graham to advise me if he thinks further clarification is needed, Chair. The way that I read condition 9 is that it's 5 vehicle deliveries per week, not 5 vehicles delivered per week. So I think there's that issue that Councillor Cooper raised, which is relevant, Chair. And if members are concerned about the number of vehicles being stored on the site at any one time, then now would be the time to address that. Although I come back to what I said earlier, that the size of the menage is as it is, and will be self-limiting to an extent, and I don't think many 7.5 ton trucks would actually could actually get into the site, let alone be stored on the menage itself. And I think my view, just speaking as the debate's going on, is that if members are concerned about the numbers of vehicles on the site, it would be a better way of dealing with that. It would be belt and braces again, Chair, because the application site is the application site, but belt and braces condition to say that no vehicles will be stored anywhere else on the in connection with the business will be stored anywhere else on the application, on the applicant's land holding, which would then mean they're all contained within that red line area. Just on the second point that Councillor Cooper made about advising neighbours, I don't believe, Jenny may have something to say on this, but I don't believe that is a condition that would be enforceable or controllable by ourselves. So I don't think it would pass the tests. I think that would just be a good neighbourly thing that we could encourage the applicant to do, but I don't think we could appropriately control that through condition, Chair. I hope that addresses the points. Councillor Cooper would happily come back if I've not answered all the points that you've raised.
Thank you, Adrian.
Councillor Reader.
Yes, Chair. I was just going to say I'm agreeing with Councillor Shipman. I think I'm not overly concerned about what the business is. It's more about how we can support the neighbours. I think there are some horse boxes which are around 7.5 tons. So I think probably horse boxes would have been going down that track of a similar size to the 7.5 ton that everybody's talking about. So I think we've got to kind of bear that in mind as well. But Adrian, I was just wondering, it's very similar to what maybe Councillor Cooper was saying, was can you restrict the timings of deliveries?
On the second point first, Chair, the deliveries and appointments would be limited by condition 12 as proposed, which restricts appointments and deliveries to the site between 8 o'clock and 6 o'clock on Monday and Friday, and then on a Saturday morning. And members may have a view on that, and you're at liberty if you don't feel they are appropriate to change them, of course. But that's currently how they would be limited. So there would be no deliveries or appointments on any Sunday or bank holiday. On the first point that Councillor Reader made, Chair, I think limiting the vehicles that could be on site in connection with the business to 7.5 tonnes would be it would meet the test, because I think that would be clear and precise and therefore easily enforceable. I think everyone has some understanding, clear understanding what 7.5 tonne trucks are. And I'm not a horse owner or a rider, so I don't know about the details of that, but I would agree, seeing what I'm seeing on the pictures I've got up here, is that some of the horse boxes can be pretty big. But again, I come back to the point that the track and the bend in the track and the site area itself will be, to an extent, self-limiting on the size and number of vehicles that can actually get into the site and be stored there. So I think that is probably the most determining factor on what vehicles can get into and how many will be stored on site. But I do think the point that Councillor Reader makes about, if members are concerned about the size, limiting it to 7.5 tonnes would be the easiest way of doing that.
Thank you. Councillor Armitage?
Well, thank you very much, Chair. I would dare to say that I'm probably one of the few people on the committee who's ever driven a 7.5 tonne vehicle. Now, we all know what a car's like and easy to turn around. Well, it is for some people. But a 7.5 tonne, well, a big lorry, a 7.5 tonner, takes a hell of a lot of manoeuvring to turn around in that sort of area. The other thing, which we're talking about, high-end camper vans. Now, we've all seen the American ones. Well, you've probably seen them on the road, and they're much bigger than a 7.5 tonne. But how they get round it is there's a lot of aluminium parts on it, so they get round as a 7.5 tonne. And some of these, you know, mentioned about horse boxes, but these American ones are far bigger and they're much higher. And we're seeing the trees overhanging, and what will happen is you just go along and you rip the trees down. And that's what happens when you take a vehicle that's too big. And because of the length, you're looking at some of these are 30 feet long, and they haven't got a retractable rear axle, so you can swing them round. And as a result, you need a lot more space. And with considering a commercial establishment in the countryside, you know, and it's next to a listed building. And I think you've got to realise how big these vehicles are. And it will be very, very difficult to legislate and to police these vehicles and the size of them. And I think it's, you know, you can't turn one round up there very easily. And that's just my point.
Thank you. Do the planning officers want to come back on that? No.
The only point I would make, Chair, if I may, is that your planning policies and the policies set out in the NPPF, I think Councillor Shipman perhaps touched on this at the very start of the discussion, is that the policies don't preclude the growth and expansion of businesses in rural areas. That's generally encouraged by national and local policies, provided it's done correctly, and hence the discussion we've had about the conditions, which hopefully is helpful to members if you believe it is appropriate for the business to go ahead, and conditions may be the way of controlling some of the concerns that members have rather than resisting the application entirely.
Thank you. Councillor Barry?
Yeah, I think I'm of a mind, after listening to what everybody said, to defer this application until we can get more detail on the size, the weight, the width, the length of all these vehicles that they're, you know, proposing to sell. I'm all right about a business taking place, but until I get more information on the type vehicle that they're going to be putting in there, then I do have concerns, especially, 7.5 ton, like William was saying, takes a lot of manoeuvring, and I'm not sure the site is suitable for that. So I think personally, I'd like to take a motion to sort of say to defer this and ask the applicant to come back with further detail of the size, shape and thing of the vehicles that they want to actually sell from this property.
Thank you. Before we move on to that, is Councillor Ridgway?
Yeah, it's just me. I'm reading in point 8 that it says the business will be operated by the owner from 2 Town End. But if they're operating from 8 AM to 6 PM, how do we know they're not going to build a building on that site to actually do their business from? I mean, I don't know what the distance is from where they live in walking distance or vehicle distance to where they're going. If it's a rainy day, are they going to stand outside? I mean, so I agree with Jane. I think we need a little bit more information. I'm just worried that, they may also want to build a little shack or a little building on there so that they can operate from the actual site itself.
Just to be clear, it's very well related to the applicant's property. I turned up on site at the entrance, and within a few seconds he'd walk to meet me by walking all the way around the back of the site. So it's all very well contained, all within one site, and the menage kind of backs onto a residential garden and the orchard that we've discussed.
Just to add to that, Chair, I appreciate Councillor Foster's asking to speak. Just on the back of what Graham's said, Chair, 2 Town End is shown on the location plan at page 21 of the report, and as Graham says, it's very well related to the site. It's all with land within the ownership of 2 Town End. It's all contiguous, and in any case, Chair, my understanding is that if they did want a building there in connection with the business for a variety of reasons, it would require planning consent.
Thank you. I hope I'm getting this in the right order. Councillor Shipman, did you have your hand up to speak?
I was just about, Graham's kind of picked up on it. I was just about to say what the issues that Councillor Ridgway and Barry have raised, they're all within the application itself. They've said what size vehicles they want. They're talking about it's appointment only. That's why they're not needing a shack on the site, because he lives around the corner, and therefore he can just jump in his, he can just literally walk around the corner. And I think we're just wasting everyone's time if we defer it. I think we need to make a decision now, either you're for it or against it. For me, I don't see any planning reasons why we can reject it. There's conditions we can put in place which mitigate, what size vehicles they're sending down the lane, and I think we can solve the issues that are being raised.
Thank you. Councillor Foster?
Thank you, Chair. It was more or less what Councillor Shipman said, but I think he's put it much better than I would have. I think everything's there in the actual conditions. And I know earlier I said camper vans, and then we moved towards the 7.5 ton limit. I'd still be happy to stick on camper vans, because that's what the original proposal was. If officers feel that the 7.5 tons would be give more protection to the people that are concerned that would be affected, then yes, I'd be happy to look at a really tight definition of camper vans, rather than it being used for other vans up to 7.5 ton. So rather than it just being used for vehicle sales, the request from the applicant is for high-end camper vans, and they painted a picture as such. I'd like to keep to that picture still. If officers feel that 7.5 tons might be more appropriate, then yeah. But for me, high-end camper vans, I'd still be rolling with that. And then to follow up also from what Councillor Shipman said, I don't think we need to defer this. I think we've got all we need on this, and there's a lot of work being done on it, and it's going to take more time and more officers' time. I think we've got enough here. And also, right at the beginning, we had officers said there's no reasons to reject this proposal. We don't have any reasons. You might have a reason to defer it, yes, but there's no reasons to reject this. So I think we should go ahead and look at doing something with this now.
Councillor Barry?
I didn't say I was rejecting the thing. I said I was actually for the business side of this. My concerns are about the length and the width of a vehicle. A camper van, I agree. You know, you can define it how you want, but there are some extremely long camper vans. And those long camper vans will struggle to get up there. Now, he's not defined anywhere that I can see the size, or, you know, in relation to the length of them. So what I'm asking for is that we get clarification, and it can be turned around quite quickly. And I'm happy then for it to go to delegated decisions if need be. But I think we need to know more about the length of these vehicles, because 7.5 ton can be 7.5 tons in any which way you want it to be. And I agree, the business, I haven't got a problem with the business whatsoever, but I want more clarity on the length and the width and the weight of the vehicles. And I think 7.5 ton is as much as you would want to put down that driveway, and especially coming out onto a main road. So I still call for a deferral.
Okay, over to the clerk to sort that lot out. No.
Well, at this stage, Chair, I'm not sure there's much to sort out. We've had Councillor Barry saying that she would actually be in favour of deferring the item. I assume you're moving that as a motion?
I am, Alan, yeah.
Yeah. And obviously, sort of, we've yet to have anyone who actually wishes to second that motion.
I'll second it on.
Oh, I was going to second it. Sorry. It's all right.
Councillor Ray.
No, you're fine. You carry on, Councillor Chair. That's fine. I was just going to second it.
And I think Adrian wants to come in because obviously if this is moving against officer recommendations, we need to be clear as to the reasons.
I just in terms of the deferral, Chair, just need to be clear exactly what it is that members are asking officers to go and get clarification on. I've written down here, Chair, that it's members would want the specific type of vehicle, as Councillor Foster has said. The application is for storage of vehicles, but the supporting information does talk about, in some explicit detail, the primary use being for high-end camper vans. So you need to be clear what additional information you would want on that. We talked about weight, as discussed with Councillor Reader. I think there is a condition that you could attach to that. It's only if you were concerned about wanting to limit it to some other weight other than an axle weight, for example. Width, again, I think the track itself is a limiting factor on the width and the turning of the lane, but that is a matter that members need to assess. But you do need to be clear exactly what additional information the committee would want in order to make a decision on the application. That's all it is, Chair. Just if members are minded to defer, officers just need to know what members are asking us to go away and seek additional clarification on.
I think when you say high-end camper vans, those high-end camper vans are very long, and I've got concerns about manoeuvring those vehicles down that lane. And I think there should definitely be a condition on for the weight limit of them. And I'm just not sure that I can see everything in here to sort of make me feel comfortable that some of these high-end camper vans aren't going to turn up down here, that are the ones that you end up pulling out the sides or whatever and causing a problem at getting out of the access. I just think the length of the vehicle, as much as anything else, is just as important in relation to manoeuvring in and out of the site.
Just again, Chair, I don't wish to unnecessarily prolong the debate, but if the length of the vehicles is so important to the consideration, determination of the application for whatever reason, then yes, we can go and seek that. I do have some concern about how the enforceability of the condition, if we are limiting the length of a vehicle in a condition that is more difficult to enforce than would be, for example, the axle weight of a vehicle.
Thank you. I'm happy to second this motion on the same reasons that Jane has given, but also that it needn't come back to the full council. We could leave it to delegated powers if you're happy with the information that you then receive.
Yeah, just on that would be a decision of members, of course. If you were minded to that, I wouldn't wish that to be delegated straight to myself. I'd want that in conjunction with yourself and the Vice Chair.
Yes, that's fine.
That would be appropriate, Chair.
Councillor Armitage?
All right, see a photograph of one of these large camper vans, high-end camper vans, going into that junction, going into that area, and seeing how big it looks in the actual menage.
Thank you. Councillor Reader?
Yeah, I think I've already said it. I think the horse boxes have probably been going up and down that lane for quite a long time. And usually horse boxes can be pretty difficult to manoeuvre. Usually you can get some pretty long ones that are attached to a vehicle as well. So I'm a bit concerned that we're going down this route now to try and defer this. I think there have been vehicles which could equally be matched to the size of the 7.5 ton. I think we could probably manage this through conditions like other colleagues have said. So I have to say I'm quite concerned with this.
Okay. You need to retract your motion. Councillor Barry?
I mean, if everybody doesn't feel the same as me, that's fine. Then we use our votes to say that, don't we? So I've put a motion forward. Let's vote on that motion. If people don't want to do that, they'll vote against it. Okay.
Over to the clerk to put the motion forward.
There is a motion, Chair, so should we move forward?
Yes, please.
Thank you, Chair. So the motion on the table.
Just quickly,
is
Chair.
Sorry.
I'm sorry to interrupt, Nicola. Just quickly, Chair. A motorhome in the UK, size of motorhomes in the UK, there's already a restriction for it to be a motorhome, and it's 12 meters long, which is long, but that is like a horse box, not a horse box, a horse lorry, if you like, 12 meters long and 2.5 meters wide. That's already a restriction for motorhomes, and 7.5 tons is one of the limits. That's why I still like the idea of defining motorhomes. But sorry to interrupt going to the vote, but I just thought I'd bring that in.
Thank you. Back to you, Nikki.
Sorry, Chair, I was just going to say, just to be clear, we're talking here about deferral of the application for the reasons set out in terms of actually getting additional information around the vehicle's weight, width, and other such matters as discussed, with the intention then that if satisfactory information is received, that this decision be taken as a delegated decision by the planning manager in consultation with the chair and vice chair.
Yes.
Is that it, Chair?
Thank you.
I'll conduct the vote by roll call. If you could clearly say either for, against, or abstain the motion to defer. Councillor William Armitage.
For.
Councillor Jane Barry.
For.
Councillor Andrew Cooper.
Against.
Councillor Mark Foster.
Against.
Councillor Carol Huckabee. Councillor Huckabee, you'll need to mute yourself.
Against.
Councillor Mo Potts.
Against.
Councillor Alan Powell.
Against.
Councillor Tracy Reader.
Against.
Councillor Jackie Ridgway.
For.
Councillor Kathy Rouse.
Against.
Councillor Diana Ruff.
For.
And Councillor Ross Shipman.
Against.
Chair, I make that 4 votes for and 8 against, which means the motion falls.
Thank you. Is there any other motion on the table? Councillor Shipman?
I'll move that it's approved subject to the conditions that the planners have put in place, as well as the weight. Was it the? I mean, Adrian needs to clarify. Was it the weight that you were saying that would be easiest to police, Adrian?
I do, Councillor Shipman, but also I don't know if I'm on the same information that Councillor Foster's looking at, but there are different classes of motorhome, the largest being a Class A, which range from generally 21 feet up to 45 feet. I don't know what that is in metric, but if members are concerned about that, we could certainly place a condition on about the axle weight of the vans. But if members did want it restricting to camper vans only, then I think we could come up with a definition of that, although I think it has to be accepted that by members that some may actually exceed the average lengths that there are, but we could include both conditions if that's what members wanted. But yes, Councillor Shipman's correct, Chair, that axle weight is by far and away the easiest way of controlling the size of vehicles.
From my point of view, I would just restrict the weight itself. I think you can convert vehicles into camper vans, and it's just going to get into a bit of a nightmare. I just think just keep it to the axle weight. You can police it quite easily, or easier, should I say? Probably not quite easy, but you can police it a lot better. And let's hopefully that restricts it enough for the residents locally to not be hindered too much.
There was also, Chair, previously discussion about an additional scheme regarding planting and landscaping, which I've noted, which officers would also add in.
Councillor Foster.
Thanks, Chair. If Councillor Shipman's happy, I've got the 7.5 tonne. I understand that completely, and it would be easier. But would Councillor Shipman also be happy to include, as well as that, for a greater safeguard, to include the definition of camper vans? I know they can be converted, but I think it'd add a greater. That's what they've asked for, and I think it'd add greater security and strengthen those considerations. Would you be happy on that?
Yes, I mean, I'm happy to accept that. If this guy's honestly wants to think, what I don't want to do is restrict him from his business. That's my concern. But I'm sure he can come back to us and ask for an amendment, a changing of condition if that condition is not fully happy with. But yeah, we'll go with that.
That would be Chair. If members are minded to approve the application, a condition limiting the sales from the site to camper vans only, notwithstanding the other submitted details.
Yeah.
That's 3 additional conditions, Chair: camper van sales, the axle weight, and the provision of landscaping and its implementation.
Yeah, that's right.
Thank you. So is there anyone seconding Councillor Shipman's proposal? Councillor Foster, thank you. Over to you, Nikki, for the vote.
Thank you, Chair. So you're voting to grant planning permission subject to the conditions discussed. For, against, or abstain, Councillor William Armitage.
For.
Councillor Jane Barry.
Again.
Councillor Andrew Cooper.
For.
Councillor Mark Foster.
For.
Councillor Carol Huckabee.
For.
Councillor Mo Potts.
Abstain.
Councillor Alan Powell.
For.
Councillor Tracy Reeder.
For.
Councillor Jackie Ridgway.
Against.
Councillor Kathy Rouse.
For.
Councillor Diana Ruff.
Against.
And Councillor Ross Shipman.
For.
I make that 8 votes for, 3 against, with 1 abstention, Chair, which means the motion has been carried.
Thank you. Thank you all very much for this morning, and we'll all see you back at just before 2 o'clock. Thank you. Oh.